Good morning, guys. Welcome to All Wheel Drive. The sequel to my 993 has arrived, is here. Today I'm going to drive the 1997 993 that I recently acquired and that was delivered a week or so ago, just so you could get a sense of how excited I am about this car and how exciting this car is to drive. It's an old car, as you will very well see from the images of the interior. One of the things I found interesting about this interior is that relative to cars that are older than this, like the 1990 RX-7 that I have, this thing feels extremely dated. But it lends to the story behind why Porsche does what Porsche does and sort of why this car is so great. This interior is purpose-built. It's not built to be flashy. It's not built to wrap you in a lap of luxury. It's meant to give you the best scenario for driving a car aggressively. Especially with the performance that these kind of cars have. Nothing fancy about it. It does have power everything. I mean, windows, mirrors, door locks, cruise control, heated seats, air conditioning, all that stuff that you come to expect with a high-end car. But there's nothing beautiful or elegant about it at all. Other than the fact that it's quality material, the leather, the materials on the dashboard and everything. You get squeaking. It's old and it sits in a garage, so the colder the car gets, the more squeaking you get. So that's just not as important as what we're going to see as we drive this car. And just going to do a little bit of just leisure driving, not too hard. The car's still somewhat new to me. I'm not going to push it too hard, but I do want to get spirited with it. That's what it's built for. So let's get going. All-wheel drive. The car has an immobilizer on it, which means whenever you stop and turn the car off, the immobilization system deactivates the ignition. So for the most part, it's pretty annoying in that the car goes off. You get back in, you turn the key. If you haven't locked and unlocked the door, when you turn the key to turn the ignition on, it won't do anything. And if you're not familiar with this, you'll think that the battery's dead. In my 997, it's kind of the same way. The key has to go back far enough to reset before you turn it back on if you've just turned it off. Unlike that car, where you can turn it off and back on, this car, if you wait too long, the immobilizer will activate its feature and then you can't start the car back up. Now I just turned the car back on after the immobilizer was turned off again. So I'm going to turn it off. So you've got that window. So one of the things I was really concerned about was, what if I stall in the middle of traffic on, say, Jamboree or PCH? I don't want to be sitting there, dilly-dallying with this immobilizer button. What if that button decided to fail at that moment and I'm sitting in the car, I can't start in the middle of traffic, and it just looks absolutely ridiculous. If you turn it off and then turn it back on, there's a way that it actually overrides the immobilization because of the time frame. So the longer it sits off, the more likely you're going to have to hit that button to turn the car back on when you get ready to start it. So just something to kind of note. It's weird, but okay. Let's go for a ride. One thing I was really addicted to as soon as I jumped in this car was the exhaust note. It just has a unique sound. I mean, the air-cooled engine is unique in its own right for a lot of reasons, and most people that love these cars will tell you it's just the most fantastic thing, the most fantastic sound you will hear. I don't disagree. It just has this very rumbly noise that just, when you start it, you know what it's intended for. It sounds like it looks, and that's really a satisfying thing to have to experience. The one thing about the driving that I've come to sort of see is that it's not as responsive at low RPMs as, say, the 997 or even the 996, which will have the same engine as the 997.1. It doesn't have the same sort of acceleration under 3 RPMs as those two cars. And it's not, it's not to say it's not great. It's different. It's an older car and it's a different engine. It's an air-cooled engine, so it doesn't have as quick a acceleration under those RPMs. It soaks up bumps like a Lincoln Continental. I mean, I'm hitting bumps in this thing and undulations in the road, and I'm not getting as much feedback as I did in even my 997, which is a newer car. I might have mentioned that car probably needs some suspension upgrades right now, but this thing rides really well. The steering is interesting though. Like, I feel like it's very loose, especially at low speeds. I'm sure at high speeds it tightens up, because most sports cars do that. They have a very sedate sort of steering geometry when you're at low speeds, because it needs to be easy to turn. You don't want to be wrestling with the wheel just making a simple right-hand turn. So I find myself using both hands a lot more, because there's just a lot of play that I'm noticing. Still drives true. It's still accurate. Listen to that sound. I mean, I've been really eager to get behind the wheel of a air-cooled model. And this being the best that they ever produced in that line, being it's the last model year they produced next to the 98, it just means that it's going to give you every sense of what they intended with this engine platform. And it's great, man. You just listen to it as it revs. It's very mechanical and very aluminum sounding, like popping and gurgling. When I received the car, I mentioned in that video that it passed smog on the first try. What was more interesting about that was that the emissions that it put out were barely even on the chart. The guy that was working on it, that did the test, it's like, yeah, he's like, I had to run it again because it wasn't putting anything out. He's like, the numbers are almost zero. And I think that has to do with the fact that with these engines, the air-cooled engines, they were just extremely clean. Now back to this interior. I came out into my garage one night and I sat in this car probably for about 10 minutes. My wife came looking for me. She's like, where is he at? And I was just sitting in it, just taking it in. And you know, the thing I noticed is that it's so simple in its form. It just, you're sitting here in the cockpit, you've got your steering wheel where it's meant to be, the stick shifts where it's meant to be, the pedals, which are attached from the floor up instead of from the dash down or the firewall down, are where they need to be. It's very roomy. This thing's huge inside, but it's so sparse. There's nothing in here that doesn't need to be in here. And they did that on purpose because they were trying to build a car that was specific for performance. And they still do that to a degree, but I think with a new market evolution and sort of the customer base that they have, you gotta compete in that luxury market too. So nowadays, 9911, much bigger car, still great, which is a testament to what I've said before. They know what they're doing over at Porsche. But they're bigger, they're more luxurious, more features. You get in one and you're kind of like overwhelmed with the things you have in it, particularly the buttons on the new cars and the middle console and on the dash. There's an abundance of them. And you literally need to sit down and read what they all do before you drive the car and actually interact with those things. But yeah, you can get in and go, but if you really want to get the most out of all the stuff you're paying for, you're going to have to take a course. This car, I'll tell you what's here. Here's the steering wheel, here's the horn, here's the gear shift, here's the brake, there's your rear wing up and down, there's your sunroof, there's a button for your door unlock and your hazard. That's all you have in this console area. The window switches are over here to my left on the door, as is the mirror control. Cruise control is a stalk behind the steering wheel. Fog lights are on the dash. Defrost is on the dash. And they're knobs. They're just very, very... I just reached up for the sunroof. It's not there. It's here. They're just little knobs. Like you'd find on a Volkswagen from 1966. And that's fine. The gauges are all laid out like a trifold brochure. You open it up, boom, 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 boom. Every gauge is just laid out clearly. The one you see the most is the RPM gauge, which is dead center. It's big. Then you've got the speedo to the right of that, and it's big enough. There's a clock. No digital business. And all your other information. Oil pressure, temp, water. It's just very purpose-built. Simple and plain. I was comparing it to the RX-7. The RX-7, if you get in that car, you immediately feel a sense of enthusiasm in terms of, oh my gosh, this is a very sporty car. It looks sporty. The interior looks as sporty as the exterior. And when you sit in it, you immediately get the sense that, okay, this is probably a fun car to drive. I wouldn't mind hanging out in this car. To my point, the RX-7 just feels like a welcoming sports car. Not that this doesn't, but you don't get in this car and just go, wow, this looks like a really fun car to drive. Especially in this day and age. I was telling my wife last night, you know, I had her sit in it, and I said, tell me what you think when you sit in this car. And she goes, yeah. She goes, but I know what it is because you've told me what it is, so it's exciting, but it's not somewhere I'd sit in and go, wow, I'm impressed. It was not impressive. It's impressive when you're going around a corner at a pretty good pace. That's when it's impressive. There's nothing in your way. There's nothing to come loose, fall off. It doesn't even have a tilt steering wheel. You tilt yourself. The seat adjusts, 8-way power adjustable seat, so that you can get positioned the way you need to be in order to drive this car the best you can drive at. Just notice at the speed I'm at, the steering is tightened up, which is what I mentioned before. It's pretty loose when you're going casually, but as you speed up and get into a more aggressive riding or driving dynamic, the steering wheel tightens up and the feedback is more positive. You can really get into it. I talked about seats in most of the videos to great degrees, and specifically the RSX. In that video, I did mention how I love those seats and how I would put those seats, and some people might have considered it sacrilege. I would put those seats in probably any car I own because they're fantastic. They really are. And then I compared the seats in terms of how great they are to the seats in another car that I felt the same way about. And it was the car that preceded this. It was the 964 911. And if you know Porsche history, the 964 really just set up what this car would be. The 964 was a great car. It was a platform in which they could build on and just turn the next iteration, the next generation of the 911 into something fantastic, which is what happened with the 993, which we are in. The seats, they're the same seats. Therefore, they're fantastic. I'm very comfortable right now. I'm planted in this thing so well. I mean, I'm sitting perfectly into it. It's almost like a baseball glove. And if you're not a baseball fan even, you know how a baseball glove is designed. It's meant to be cupping so that when the ball comes, it just falls right in and it's nestled and it ain't coming out if you close it up properly. The seat feels like a baseball glove. I'm perfectly nestled in it. I mean, it's pushed, my back is pushed in enough to where the lumbar is just wrapped right around my torso and my lats just perfectly. And I feel like I'm in control, and I'm in the right place to control the car no matter what my situation turns out to be. In a corner, in a straightaway, I just feel like I'm in the best position to drive this car as effectively as possible. Now, I said I've been babying it. I've been driving it very leisurely and not too aggressive. I did at one point spin it up pretty good on the highway, and I'd say it goes pretty fast. So I did give it one little test, just a little taste, if you will, of what it's like to go fast in this car, but I didn't record that. But I was smiling, I promise you. Man, this thing feels good. As I'm getting into these corners, it feels so good. It's so connected. RPMs is when it wakes up. This sounds great. You hear that? Just holding it. Now, this car has, based on the specs, and the specs are in the manual. A lot of manuals that I've read, Japanese car, other cars I've owned, they do not tell you how much horsepower the car has. They do not tell you how fast the car will get from 0 to 60, and they don't compare it across all the trims. Now, Porsche is a different animal. This is what their tagline is: performance. So I'm in the manual. This car had an output of 282 horsepower when new. With 77,000 miles on the clock, it could be still that close. I mean, the engine is tight. I was looking through some of the old paperwork, repair orders. They were still with the car when I bought it. And there was quite a bit of money spent on this car, specifically the engine. The heads were actually rebuilt, which means all those components are working optimally. So it's possible that this car still is somewhere up around the 270, 282 horsepower that it had from the factory. But to my point, in the manual, it explains what the output is of every trim. So this is the Carrera 2. There was also a Carrera 4. There was a Carrera S, 2S if you will, a Carrera 4S, cabrios of all those, as well as a turbo. And the manual gives you a side-by-side comparison of all the cars, horsepower-wise, and 0 to 60 times. In the manual, it says that the Carrera 2 non-S is quicker than every other model trim, except for, and you know where I'm going with this, the turbo. Obviously, it's not going to be faster than the turbo. That would just not make any sense whatsoever. But it's impressive that the S model is slower. Obviously, the automatic versions are slower because, as I mentioned in another video, automatics were just slower than manual transmissions because they weren't as sophisticated as they are today with the PDKs and the SMGs and all that. So, if you wanted the fastest car, you bought a manual. The Carrera 2 is basically the quickest car and has the highest top speed. I believe it's 171 of everything except the turbo. So that really helped solidify how glad I am I got this car. I mean, because you want the one that's the badass, right? It's not the turbo, but geez, if I can't have the turbo, I at least want the one that's as much fun and the most fun I can have and that's the fastest. So I got the right one, baby. One of the things I really love about this generation is the size of the car. It's a lot smaller. It is so much smaller. It's shorter, obviously, than the 993, or the 997 and the 996. It's actually smaller than my RX-7. They're parked right beside each other in the garage. I keep those two in my home garage. And it is really small from the outside. Inside, it's huge. Obviously, it's bigger than the RX-7. I mean, but from length to length, it's smaller than the RX-7. Width, it's pretty small as well. It takes up a small footprint in the garage, which is cool for me. But it's very spacious on the inside. So just a real good build design overall. But being small from the outside dimensions makes it more agile. Everything is just precise. The turn-ins are great because the wheelbase is short. But that size really helps this car to be planted. It makes it a joy to drive because you've got less mass to haul around. Gives you a little bit more confidence. Now, with that said, the steering, it's better now that I'm going through corners and I'm driving aggressively. It's tightened up, but it's still not as great as the 997. Of course, that's an all-wheel drive car too, but it's a newer car. I mean, we're talking about 10 years between the two. And you can tell the difference, but for what it is, man, it's such a pure experience. It just embodies everything about connected driving. You know, I talk about cars being visceral, and this is a car that epitomizes that thought, because it's back to basics engineering, what Porsche did phenomenally well. Oh man, it's no slouch, my friends. As I said, it takes a little while for the power to build up because you have to rev it a little bit more, but man, when it gets going, you got to watch out. Again, it's a very simple philosophy of build. No driver aids. I don't have stability control. I don't have traction control. At least not that I can control it. And that means that everything is dependent on my ability to manage this car's performance and handling. It's got a 6-speed transmission, and it's really good. I mean, the shifts in this thing are awesome. They're short. But if you're watching how I'm driving this car, I'm very attached to it. I'm holding the wheel nice and firm. I feel like I'm one with it. There's a great deal of symmetry with me and the way that the car is built around me. It's everything I thought it would be. You know, it's like taking a time machine back to a period where a performance car was only a performance car if the pilot could perform in it. And that's how this car is. You've got to learn it. You've got to become a team with it. If you've driven newer Porsches, I highly recommend you drive an old Porsche. I think you'll appreciate the newer ones more, but I think you'll come to appreciate Porsche 911 that much more, just because you'll understand every nuance that went into the car that's out today. And you'll realize that they have been doing this for so long and doing it so well. I mean, they can change that recipe up no matter how different from the original, and it's still going to be a fantastic meal. But this just really sets the bar for me. I'm loving this. Absolutely loving this. And now I understand why they've won so many races with their cars. These guys are geniuses. Not that anybody else doesn't make a good car, but unless you've been in the dark ages, you know that the Porsche brand has a big bullseye on its backside. Because everybody's always trying to accomplish the things that they've accomplished with as little as they've used to accomplish what they've accomplished. I know that's a tongue twister, but simple form or simple language, what that means is that Porsche has taken a smaller engine, an unconventional placement of the engine. Pretty much everything about the car is unconventional. And they've been able to exceed the expectations of cars that were purpose-built to be the fastest things you could go around a track or any sort of road with. But Porsche took a horizontally opposed 6-cylinder and we're able to just do so many things with it. It's like a rubber band. You just pull it and it stretches, and very seldom will you break it. And it's the same thing they do now. The tires on this thing are 17 inch. The wheels are 17 inch. The tires are fairly small. I think for the day they were pretty decent. I think it's 205s on the front, which is not a very wide tire at all. And on the back, I want to say it's a 295. One of the things that I plan to do is switch those wheels out. I recently purchased, actually before the car even arrived, I went and purchased a set of turbo wheels from a 996. That's a really wide rear tire. And essentially it's what I have on the 997. And so the goal will be better handling, particularly in the front, because that'll be a wider wheel as well. That'll probably happen in a few months. These tires are good, so I'm not in a big hurry, and I'm not going to drive this car a ton. Well, I say that. We'll see. But I'm not going to put it in a Ziploc. I would like to see it appreciate, and I know it will. Basically, I think because I bought it where I bought it, out of state, I was able to get it a lot less than anything I would have gotten in California. So I bought it with a ton of equity built in. But I know that this car is going to climb, especially as it gets closer to that 25-year-old mark, which is another 5 years from now. And that's when I think the prices will go nuts. If you're looking to get a 993, there are a lot of options out there. There are actually quite a few cars on the market right now. Typically, coupes are the most desirable car. So getting a convertible for investment purposes, I think you will see return on it. It won't be as significant if you're buying for investment purposes. So you want to get the coupe. Targas, same thing. I think Targas are unique. I think they are desirable. There are a lot of them out there. I don't think it's a car that people are going to be as eager to acquire from you, or acquire, period, from you if you buy one. I think they're unique, and if you get the right customer, you might get a pretty good return on that investment if you're buying for investment purposes. If you want to just get into one of these just so you can have the experience of saying, I own one, I drove one, and knowing what it's like, maybe entertain one of those cars. I mean, you can get a convertible, or cabrio as they're called. I'll say you could probably pick up one in, depending on mileage, in the 30s. They are starting to rise a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of them in the 40s, lower 50s. But if you get one with a lot of miles, you could probably pick it up in the low value market. And to be honest with you, Porsche enthusiasts could care less about mileage. It's all about how it's been maintained. If you've rebuilt the engine, if you've had it all meticulously cared for, there'll be a demand for it. But again, it won't be an investment direction if you're getting the convertible or the cabrio. I say that, caveat is, you can make a return, but from a collector standpoint, it's not going to be the one that people are going to be eagerly seeking. But for you as an enthusiast who wants to experience one, that's not a bad direction to go in. They're still beautiful. The driving dynamics will be the same. You don't lose anything there. Rigidity is going to be a little different, obviously, because without a roof, the structural rigidity of the entire body is going to be a little less. You're going to get a lot of shifting, flexing. So if you can get a hold of one, go for it. I don't think you can really go wrong with it. As long as you buy one that's been cared for, you've got some history on it. And if not, get it for a price and then get as much done to it as you can. A pre-purchase inspection is always advised, especially on cars like this, because the older these cars get, the more expensive they are to maintain. Because you gotta keep in mind, Porsche doesn't make parts for these cars anymore. So there's going to be some aftermarket channels that you can get stuff from, but you know, those things are very few and far. So you're going to pay for all the things you need. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that the car becomes more valuable the more you put in it. It's one of the few cars that as you add money into it, you can add value into it. Because someone who really enjoys these cars is going to appreciate the time you took and the money you put into it to make it everything it needs to still be. Alright guys, so that's it for now. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you have fun watching these videos. I hope they're interesting. This is what I do because I just love cars. And the name all-wheel drive implies I want to drive everything, and I want you to be able to experience it too. So thanks again. Peace. Subscribe, share, like. Keep looking at the other videos. There's always going to be some new ones coming. Some sequels out there. I've recently put up the RSX video, which was a part 2, if you will, to the Integra video. What we've got coming is the E46 M3. Should be coming very soon, along with the 997 Carrera 4 Cabrio, which I think is one of the most beautiful cars that I've ever seen, but it's one of the most beautiful cars that I own. And we've got a ton of other things from other enthusiasts who I'm going to be meeting up with to maybe experience their cars. So keep your eyes open, stay tuned, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like and follow. Thanks again, guys. All-wheel drive. Peace out.